Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining my webinar on migrations. It's the title pending. I am Barend. I'm the support manager at GT Consult. Usually the one that gets dragged into when things get messy. So, yeah, that's me. During the course of this webinar, we're going to be looking at a couple things in terms of migrations, mainly focusing on what it is, what people assume it is versus the reality of what it is, plus what disasters occur when migrations aren't spec'd correctly. And then I'll also be taking you through some of the tools that we use to do migrations on and just show you a bit of the inside view on how it functions. All of this is based on events in real life, migrations that have happened and occurred, and lessons learned. Everything in this slideshow you're going to see today is probably broken at least once, usually at 2 a.m. when everyone's trying to sleep. So the first step we're going to step into is what do people think a migration is. Now, this is where it all begins. This is where the problems usually begin as well. But majority, the mindset is I'm just going to copy my data, update a few little locations. My users are going to log in and boom, we're done. We continue as normal. And unfortunately, that mindset being the majority rule when it comes to the approaching a migration of data, it creates unrealistic timelines. Budgets are under assigned, and this obviously creates an uncomfortable conversation midway through the beginning of the migration. Saying, "Well, this is what you wanted. This is what you got." But what actually happens during a migration is your permissions change, the way they are managed changed, particularly once you move from file shares to SharePoint Online. There's a big change in how your permissions are governed. It doesn't rely on your server inheritance anymore or your Windows OS permission matrix, your group policies, all those kinds of things, they fall away. And it's managed within SharePoint Online in their own permissions area where you can allocate your groups, you can allocate AD groups, you can allocate individual users. So straight away, copy paste and user access, they don't just go hand in hand naturally. It's something you really need to look at. Metadata disappearing. Metadata, basically what it is, I'll cover in a little more depth in a second, but basically what metadata is, it just, without it, SharePoint doesn't know what a document is, who it belongs to, what it's supposed to be for, how you're going to secure it. And various other factors as to why metadata disappearing is so important. Customizations break. So if you're current using on-prem SharePoint, maybe 2013, 2016, 19, subscription edition, whichever area you find yourself on the on-prem space, you may have some custom pages there or classic customizations, web parts, things like that. They all go out the window once you push into a modern space due to Microsoft's compatibility. Your users get confused because they don't know where anything is, they can't find anything, they don't have access to anything. And your support desk for your IT team goes crazy. They don't know what's happening, they just have thousands of requests, users can't do anything, find anything, want anything. A key note to understand, maybe to make the mental understanding better, is migration is not just copying data, it is translating behavior. So we're taking the behavior of how it works now and implementing it in an online environment in SharePoint. The biggest disasters and trapfalls we need to watch out for that have and will usually cause migrations to not go as swimmingly as you would like is permissions. metadata loss, customization, identity user mapping, and no testing or validation by the users. Now, to break down each one is basically permissions. You've got perhaps a file share online or offline file share, servers locally hosted, which have relied on your Active Directory groups or security groups that you've implemented locally. Those differ from Azure AD groups that SharePoint Online would rely on. Your attributes are different, your profile security groups, your settings, everything is different. So unless you have configured your online groups to match your on-premise groups or your hybrid forest, you're going to have a bad time in your online environment. Your nested groups break, so if you had groups within groups for your file shares, inheriting each other, again, unless that's now identically uploaded or created, that's going to fall away, and users are going to lose access to things they've been using every day since the day they started. Broken inheritance, that is with regards to a parent folder and a child items. So the user has access to the child items via a group. That group gets its permissions from the group above it. So if you've got a file share location like CHR/complaints, and you've given complaints access for specific individuals, but the parent above it, so the HR folder, you've given a group to manage that security, or the users that are in that group have access to HR. You break the inheritance to have unique permissions in there. You migrate that across. Those entities do not exist in a new space. You end up with permissions inheriting from owner sites, main sites. So now your HR documents go from being a private secure folder to being accessible through anyone that has access to the environment because of permissions and inheritance not being set up correctly. What this means for your environment, as I've explained, is that users experience they've lost access to all their stuff. They can't access their HRs. They can't do anything if they're from the HR department. Finance can't do anything in terms of finance because they can't find any of their documents. They can't see anything. They try and go to the finance location. They can't see files. They have access to files, but then there's outside parties that used to have access to certain files, and they start rapidly sharing to everybody who comes to them, to the one person that has access to everything. They go, hey, I don't have access, I don't have access. That person starts just sharing to everybody, no matter what it is. And then your security and your compliance goes out the window because now people have access to sensitive data that shouldn't have access to sensitive data. Security now falls through the floor because anyone and everything can access your links that have been shared outside because, for example, you haven't locked down your external sharing as yet. So it just becomes a nightmare, and your company's IP ends up on the internet, your data flying everywhere. Easy opportunity for people to get involved in. And then trying to explain to audit boards why your compliance is suddenly so poor. It's an awkward conversation I don't think anyone wants to have. In order to avoid that, you do a bit of footwork, you do a looking, you're digging, you look at your current configuration in terms of permissions. You look at what you need, what you have, if it's group-based sharing or if it's individual users that have been added for access to the locations. You need to ensure that those, if it's domain group managed, that they exist in your Azure AD with the same configuration. Alternatively, if it's individual sharing, that will take care of itself when you move across from your on-prem file share or your on-prem SharePoint when you move across to online. Metadata loss. If your metadata disappears, you're looking at some interesting scenarios in the world of SharePoint. Metadata falls away, your file shares innately don't have enforced metadata. So once you move it to online, they might not be any searchable data, like search criteria, like a file type, file name, uh, what it is, where it was. Search and filtering becomes non-existent. It just doesn't work until you resolve the metadata. So users trying to search for documents on your SharePoint sites, like finance, trying to search finance for their payroll data, they can't find it. They're trying to filter specific entries like year 2024, 25. They can't filter because of the metadata being lacking. The files don't appear because the files themselves don't have that information. So they don't know what to, SharePoint doesn't know where to bring it up. And flat document libraries, meaning basically that everything sits within a folder and all your files are just sitting there in the middle of nowhere in one central location. So you got HR, then you got finance within HR, you've got your various years sitting in the same library. It's obviously a mess based on that outcome. The complete impact would be search. So if you are relying on search within SharePoint, it's a feature obviously that's part of SharePoint that you'd want to make use of to help you find everything, just like you would search on a Windows computer or a file share. You would type in what you're looking for in the search bar, and it would obviously bring up the files and the folders with the highest relevance to your keywords, like payroll 2024. It usually then returns all the folders. Without the metadata on the files or the libraries, you search payroll 2024. Yes, the data's there, but because it doesn't have the relevant information baked into the file, search goes, I don't see that. Doesn't exist. Um, your views and your filters break. So if you had a certain way that you put up all your files, you only wanted to see your data, or you only wanted to see specific data such as a year. You click on the view, you click on the year, nothing returns because again, there's nothing that SharePoint knows what to do with the files. And then your retention and your automation fail as well as a result, because your retention policies don't know what they're looking for. Your sensitivity labels are growing question marks. And in automation with regards to workflows and those kinds of features, if you're pointing to look for specific data, again, it's not going to find it. It's going to return nothing. That's something to really look out for when you're moving your files from one site to another, is to ensure that your mapping is done and your data in the new location within SharePoint Online has relevant information that it looks for. Usually the tools that we make of use of do this automatically for you to ensure accuracy and thing. But if you had to manually just go onto your server, take a couple of folders, drag it into SharePoint, yes, your data is going to be there. Are you going to be able to use it correctly? Not so much. So just another reason why you should look at a migration as not just copying of folders. Disaster number 3, customizations break. This is relevant to your classic stuff. So if you're running on SharePoint on-premise that's 2013 or older, or you had a 2016 or 19 running with classic functionality, classic pages, custom master pages, even info path forms, excuse me now. These will all immediately cease to function and they will not move over into a SharePoint Online environment. These are things that need to be looked at in detail and replicated and recreated when moving into your online space. So if you have on your, and this doesn't really apply to file shares on-prem because you don't have master pages and all those other features. This is more towards you're running SharePoint on an on-prem environment and you're looking now to get rid of the servers and the overhead and you're looking to move it into the online space. These are points to bear in mind when looking at doing your migration. Do I have custom master pages? Do I have script editor web parts or any sort of custom code? Do I have import fast forms? Because if you don't look at these things, you're going to lose them all. The big concern with losing them all, well, your critical pages that rely on them cease to function as intended. Your processes disappear. Suddenly, no one's signing off on anything. And then everything is in such chaos. Now everyone sits and you emergency grabbing service providers. Anybody can get your hands on to recreate these pages, suffering massive loss as an entity, but also unnecessary pressure and stress from everyone else just because we just said, whatever, move it. It's just copying. It'll just keep working, which is where nobody wants to find themselves in. Disaster number 4, identity and user mapping. Now, this is one we've picked up numerous times. What this applies to, or the relevance of the identity and the user mapping, is your user principal names mismatch. Your domains might not be the same because automatically going from anything into the SharePoint space, it becomes yourdomain.sharepoint.com. So any domain references you might have for files living online or anywhere else, those will fall away. Users that have ownership over files and content, they become orphaned. External users go missing because you've copied it from here, old location, into new location. User has the external link to old location. That doesn't update, that doesn't change, they can't access that data anymore. This means that files become orphaned, sharing breaks, and again, it touches on the audit and compliance failures. Orphan files means that the file exists in online or in your SharePoint Online space, the file's there, but it's got no owner. It's literally like real life. If you were an orphan in a family situation, you have no parents, so who do you turn to tell you what to do? Same thing with these files. Files go orphan. They become incredibly difficult to manage. They become incredibly difficult to find. And in quite a few cases, you actually find orphaned functionality in itself just creates issues on its own. You'll have weird files showing up in your searches. You'll have weird access. Someone might be able to access a file they're not supposed to because it doesn't have an owner, so it doesn't know what permissions to apply. It just sits there aimlessly wondering what to do with itself. Your sharing breaks, meaning that if you had external entities accessing your data, or if you had file shares set up that you were sharing to your end users who were accessing files from servers, so from their computer you created a link back to the server as a Z drive where they used to access their payroll stuff. That breaks because it doesn't exist there anymore. It now exists online and you've turned off that server. So there goes all your sharing. So users again, no access, no data, no nothing. They can't do anything. They're panicking, you're panicking, and just no one needs it. And then the last one, last disaster on the list that we picked was no testing or validation. Looks fine, it's got a test. In other words, copy your data and don't just go, okay, it finished, everything's there, it's fine. My migration log says it's done because I copied it using a tool. It says it's finished, so all my data's there. No user testing and no rollback plan. So before I get into what works, basically what this means is that if you want your migration to work, you want someone to pilot it. So you want to get a service provider like ourselves to get involved in the process because there are quite a few points to a successful migration that you do not want to miss. And a lot of the time you'll find service providers have themselves have discovered these things due to trial and error, or what works, what doesn't work, what failed, what didn't fail. So you want an entity to be able to go from start to finish. Here's what we're migrating. This is what we're migrating it to. What do we need to consider? What do we need to put in place? And the service providers will come to you. They'll say, we need to do an assessment so we can understand the scope of the migration. Yes, it's 200 gigs of data, but SharePoint Online has restrictions and limitations on certain characters, path links, various other factors. What sort of functionality are you expecting from your data sitting in SharePoint Online? Do you need it to be accessible from various departments? How do you want to share it? Who do you want access to what? How do you want to manage your permissions? Do you want to use domain groups that you connect to your SharePoint Online and have them manage the permissions so that you can manage from your Azure Active Directory, do the user updates for the various groups there to make management easier? Or would you rely on the SharePoint groups and direct user assignment? Now, I would never recommend direct user assignment personally, because if you have placed that user into a space and let's say they were head of a department, you granted that user access to the main site, several other sites. Now the user changes departments or leaves and you got another user in its place. Now you have to go and redo the permissions for the new user at all those different areas that you've added them directly, whereby if you used a SharePoint group or a domain group, all you would have had to do was go and update your permissions in those areas. Instead, now you're spending hours removing and adding or updating the permissions where it would have been a 1-2 click on your directory, on your domain directory, and you would have been done. You want business users to validate your move, because what works for you doesn't necessarily work for your average user. You might look at it from the outside as a IT individual, which is quite common, or from a business as a whole, you might look at it and go, okay, well, it says HR, it says finance, I can see the stuff's there, happy. Which is usually not the case when it goes down to the end user. The person sitting there working with the finance documents, the person working with their HR stuff, your factory workers trying to find their orders. And once you get into those nitty-gritties from the various departments, you then start to get a lot of feedback. Perhaps it's, I can't see these files anymore, or perhaps it's, I'm seeing files I've never seen before, or some strange reason I can see the file but it doesn't want to open, or it doesn't work, or I used to click here and click share and send it and now I can't find it anymore. Those kinds of things. And those things will only come up once you take it from a user's perspective. So if you do not rely on user validation testing, you have a big problem in the long run when you do any kind of migration. Permission testing, it's similar to the business user validation, but it's more in the back-end sense of, do the right people have access to the right things? Have you created an environment of how you want to share? Are you managing it via Active Directory or directly? Are you happy with how it's lined up? Because when it comes to permissions, if you set it up properly from the beginning, you only make your life easier down the road. Because the longer your SharePoint environment runs, the more names come in and out of the user databases, the more people get added and shared and added manually. And let's be real, most people added usually do not get removed. They become furniture. They don't exist anymore, but their names are on the website, shared on the SharePoint site because no one ever removed it or no one ever deleted the account from Active Directory. So eventually you sit with 1,000 users when you have 500 active, and now you've got to go and clean all that up. Where if you plan it from the start, you go, I want these groups to be in these various areas. We're going to manage it this way and that way, and we're going to keep your lives easy. Because then in the long run, as people come and go, need permission, don't need permission, end of the day, all you're doing is clicking a few buttons, updating some groups or some Active Directory groups or SharePoint groups, depending on which route you're in. and your life remains easy. And then the last one is a delta run. Now, if no one's ever heard the term delta run before, it's basically an incremental run. So meaning that once you've kicked off your migration, you've taken all your data, you've put it online, it's finished, everything exists in the new space. But obviously, while that is happening, people are still working in the data. They're still making changes. They're still actively on the go about their daily routine, their daily workspace, fulfilling their roles, updating documents, making new documents. Automation is carrying on. New things are populated. What a delta run is or a incremental run is, once your main migration is done, everything in the new area is set up as it should be, and you're happy with its function and everything's good, and you've now determined a go live date and everyone's ready to hop over. We then run a delta run, which then takes all the changes that have happened since and moves them over safely without overriding any of the files that are in the new area, unless there's a newer version of it from your source location. So it allows us to fill in the gaps without redoing the whole thing, just to ensure that all the data is present. If you manage these few little pointers, there's obviously a lot of factors involved when it comes to migrations. There's a lot of things to look at and pull from. But if you focus on the key areas on your initial approach and what to consider, you'll have a successful migration 95% of the time. Now, when it comes to migrations, you should always make use of a tool. I would never move my information from a file share or anywhere unrelated to SharePoint into SharePoint Online and just copy paste it. That's setting myself up for failure. What you're going to want to do is you want to use a tool, and there are many. But when it comes to the migration tools, there's many options. Fundamentally, they all do the same thing. Like you got BitTitan, ShareGate, SharePoint Migration Tool, and various others. And all of them have their pros and cons, but on the foundational level, they help you move your stuff from point A to point B. Now, I'm going to show you just one or two of the tools that we normally use. Our preferred ones are usually ShareGate or the SharePoint migration tool, depending on your budget and what you're looking to do. As each tool has its pros and cons, and some just generally work better for certain things versus other things. Now, if you pick the right tool, you're going to get the job done nicely, but it's not going to be the miracle cure that just fixes your old poorly designed structures, your old, like you've got a folder and a folder and a folder and a folder, or you've got one share with all your stuff in it, things like that. That's not going to solve that. That's where the planning still comes in. The tool is just going to help you get the job done with as few hiccups and things to do after the fact. Now, let's jump into the SharePoint migration tool as a start. Right, so SharePoint migration tool is free. That's one of the major benefits of having it. If you have a 365 subscription, you've got SharePoint, you've got the migration tool. And you might be thinking, oh wow, it's free. Why don't I just always use this? Well, there is some caveats to the SharePoint migration tool. It works really well for file shares, like incredibly well. Google Workspace as well, Dropbox. So it works really well for these areas. Anything outside of it, you're going to have a hard time because they've only developed it to work with these features. Or SharePoint on-prem 2010, 2013, 2016, even though it doesn't mention it yet, it works for 2019 as well, and subscription edition. Because basically anything past 2016 is considered modern and basically function the same. This tool, I'll show you one of our most migration tasks that we get from some of our customers is file shares, because they've now done cost exercises. They want to get rid of the servers that they're hosting. They want to get rid of the IT overhead. They want to just clean up stuff, get rid of legacy archaic data, and move it into a more structured environment. SharePoint Online. So I'm going to show you how we actually go through, sort of at a basic level, how we get your data from your server into SharePoint Online, and why the tool actually matters quite a bit. So depending on the migration you're going to do, if you're going to do a workspace, a Dropbox, an Ignite, Streambox, a file share, you obviously just click the relevant one to you if you're going to view tasks. Now, migrating from a file share with the Microsoft tool requires an agent to be installed on that computer or on that server or on a server that has access to what you're trying to move. Obviously, best practice is put the agent on the server that's hosting the data, because the agent is going to handle the communication between your tool and the files. So if you install it on the server where the files that you want to move are sitting, it's going to talk to itself and the files and then push it to your SharePoint Online. If you install it, even though it works, if you install it on another server that has the visibility to the files and folders, you then create a scenario where server talks to other server to grab the files, hand it back. This server then tells SharePoint Online, here comes the files. So you've automatically now got network data being used within your network that could slow connections for the local users. And then you've got an extra point of failure should that server go offline in the middle. There goes your migration from the files where they are. So best practice when using this tool, install it on the server that you're looking to move. Now, it's quite simple to use it, but basically you install the agent on your machine. It then, I'll show you what it looks like as well. It's this little lightweight agent. It sits in the background. It doesn't affect you in the least. It asks you for a sign in here. You sign in with the user that has access to your SharePoint Online environment. And then you can do a quick test with the account that you used to the local path, whether it's going to see it or not. Now, something to bear in mind with this is the files or the folders that you want to move need to be shared folders. They can't just be normal folders. So all your folders then need to be shared so that's visible via the network. So I just went on my laptop, shared temp. I can test it. I've got access. Great. But now, how do I know what I'm moving or what I'm going to be moving or whatever? That's when it comes to scans. Now, the scan is what we would almost, not even almost, guaranteed every time do before we do any kind of migration is a scan. The reason for the scan is the scan will pick up anything and everything within those folders. It'll pick up the amount of files, it'll pick up the size, it'll pick up the amount of folders, it'll pick up the longest path length. So when I say path length, I mean server name, folder slash file name. All those individual characters together create a number value like this, 62, which is my longest path length. The reason that's relevant is one of the restrictions within the SharePoint space is a maximum path length. Now, if this exceeds the maximum of 255 characters, it will not move those files into the online space, which is a big reason why we do the scans beforehand. It identifies the current permissions on those folders and files, and it also identifies, it doesn't show here, but because I haven't added the columns, but it also identifies any files with invalid characters. SharePoint Online has another nifty restriction of certain characters, like slashes, dollars, stars, those kinds of characters. There's it's a short list, but it's a pretty ruining list depending on your naming convention. And those files will also not move across into your SharePoint online space. So the scans, or as we call them, a pre-migration assessment, are of utmost extreme importance. Without it, you're going to move files. You're not going to know what's left behind. You're not going to know what actually moved. You're not going to know what didn't move. You're not going to know if there's going to be any issues. You're not going to know, any of the nitty-gritty data. What I did a quick scan on my temp folder. If it has folders within it, you want to have this ticked. If not, you untick it, and it does a scan. Once it's done, it allows you to create a nifty little summary report that gives you more detail than just 3, 4, 1. It's unfortunately in CSV, so you just need to quickly convert it into something that you can read. And then it looks something like this. So I've only got one folder with like 3 files in it. It was just a temporary thing. But you can see when it was last accessed, when it was last modified, whether it's good to migrate, or whether it's just or whether it's a folder that you need to look at as a concern. The other thing that you would normally get from these reports as well is it'll highlight the issues with the files and folders that won't move, so that you know how to rectify it in order to get it to move. Now, once your scan is completed, it's cool. It knows it's this size. It's got these many files and folders. It's got a little like by comparison sort of charts. Now you want to migrate it. If you're happy with what it looks like, you want to migrate it, you can just click copy to migrations, and this will automatically put it in the queue to migrate, and then bring you over here where the actual task takes place. Here you can see how far the migration is. You can see how many files have migrated out of how many, and the sizes of the move. So this gives us a great understanding, obviously, with how far we've gotten while it's running. But also at the end of it, we can see if anything, if it's, for example, 2 out of 3, then we already know, oh, well, there's an issue. We don't have to go through everything individually, one by one, dig into it, figure out what's wrong, or miss things, and then 2 years later, your users suddenly need it, and it's gone, long gone, because no one would have seen it or known it existed. So that's a beautiful overview for that. And you can also export this report as well to give a more detailed report, so that you can hand it to customers. We can show them, here's the issues, this is what their team needs to resolve. Because if you're looking at, for example, a shared location for finance, you've got, as an entity, you've got your own finance processes, you've got your own finance documents, structures, how it looks. We won't know that. So we generate the report and we send it through saying, here's your potential issues, here's the folders and files these issues are with. So you can very easily just, as the person that's in charge of the cleanup or the correcting of the documents, okay, I got to go to this folder, this location, rename this, or move it out because it's too big or too long, those kinds of things. So it just makes your life easier as well. Now, this tool is amazing for file shares, and these other areas like Workspace, if you're using Google for your emails and your content and things like that, to move it into the SharePoint space. Amazing. The reason we don't really typically use it for SharePoint on-prem to SharePoint Online is because this tool can only copy content. So in other words, you've created your SharePoint space, you've got a nice looking page, home page, structure, you've got everything nice in place, you've got the news, the weather, the reports, And then on that site where everything lives, you've got your documents and your folders and things in there. All of that pretty customization, what it looks like, the way it navigates, the way it works, that all falls under structure and uh, front end of SharePoint, meaning that that stuff will not be copied by this tool. This tool will only copy the content, which is the libraries, the folders, the files, the things you use. So if you use this specific tool for on-prem to online with SharePoint, you're going to have to do a lot of building in your online space. Where if we use our favorite alternative, which is ShareGate, you have so many more options when it comes to getting data from your source to your destination. Not only does it work for file shares, but it works for SharePoint, mailboxes, OneDrive, SharePoint Online to SharePoint Online, even. Let's say you're changing domains or moving into your own Office 365 tenant, but you still want your SharePoint stuff in the new tenant. This tool will facilitate that. We start off just like any other migration or source analysis, which is your pre-migration assessment, which then gives you a in-detailed report of anything that exists in your current environment. It will show you all your sites. If you're using SharePoint Online, if it's file shares, it'll just show you all the folders and the relevant structure. But if you're looking at moving from SharePoint on-premise to online, it'll show you your permissions, it'll show you your site collections, your sites, your any files that are checked out, meaning they're actively in use and they haven't been saved or checked in, as those will not move unless they're all checked in. It'll tell you exactly which documents and where they checked out. It'll tell you which sites you haven't used in the last 6 months or more. So you might look at your area and go, while I'm moving everything, let's clean up. Which sites haven't I used? Or which sites do I use frequently? Or which don't I use ever? It'll show you. All of these last 6 months haven't even been touched. 2 years ago, this site was accessed. And you can leave those behind, obviously, which saves you then on your total migration costs, your total size, and just make life easier and cleaner. And the beauty of this tool as well, when it comes to SharePoint specifically, it allows you to bring over your entire structure as is. And when I say structure, I mean your sites, your content, as in your lists, your libraries, your content types, your site columns, if you have like custom columns configured, like modified by, view, type, country, region, whatever columns that you have when you look at your data on your lists, your groups, your permissions, any SharePoint workflows, the managed metadata, which I touched on previously, which is very important. Your sensitivity labels, if you've got governing in place or you've got sensitive data that you're currently locking down, those things will move as well. So it basically takes all of SharePoint, puts it online, and you're done. All your data is there. Obviously, that excludes the caveats of the classic stuff that we touched on earlier, but any compatible structures, sites, lists, libraries, everything will move as is into the new space, minimizing the amount of work you need to do afterwards. It can also copy your Teams, your OneDrive, your emails, your planner, and yeah, so this tool is incredibly powerful. The assessment is incredibly detailed to help you and us through the journey. And it gives you a beautiful move into SharePoint Online. And then last but not least, that's it for the tools. Apologies. Last but not least, the key takeaways from what a migration is versus what people think it is migration is a translation of behavior, not a copying of data. So we're taking functionality and replicating it into the SharePoint Online space. to disrupt users as minimal as possible, and also to just make your overheads and stress less. uh, your permissions and your identity management needs to be scoped out correctly and thought about beforehand before moving your data. Metadata is a must and is a crucial part of why using tools to do migrations to keep that metadata in place or create that metadata from files coming from file shares into online so that you are able to actually find the data you're looking for or use it more or use your views or your filters and use the functionality of SharePoint Online a lot more. Testing, mandatory. No exception. Users need to test. You who did the moves, we, the engineers, the IT, whoever is involved and is assigned to test, has to test. You should never make assumptions on whether your migration is a success or not. And modernization is a part of migration. Chances are you're moving because of support falling away for SharePoint on-prem versions, or you're sick of using file shares, or it's become too not cost effective anymore to keep the on-premise servers, or you're just looking to clean up your IT department and your overheads. Moving to online, you are now modernizing. You are creating new functionality, new views, new looks, new features. You're looking at automation. You're looking at modern functionality. So key takeaways, remember these points and you'll have a very nice migration experience. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope my ADHD brain kept us on a path and it made sense. And yeah, just reach out to GT Consult if you have any more questions. And that's me. Thank you guys for joining. I'll see you in the next one.